Watch what happens when someone stops caring about the outcome of a conversation. Their voice becomes steadier, their posture more relaxed, their words more economical. The other person, sensing this shift, begins to work harder to engage them. They lean forward, speak more urgently, seek validation more desperately. The detached person has inadvertently gained power simply by withdrawing their emotional investment. This dynamic reveals something counterintuitive about human psychology. The more someone needs something from an interaction, the less likely they are to get it. The less they need, the more others are willing to give. Detachment creates a vacuum that others feel compelled to fill with attention, effort, and respect. Most people operate from the opposite principle. They believe that showing investment demonstrates value and commitment. They think that expressing need creates obligation in others. They assume that emotional transparency builds trust and connection. These beliefs often produce the reverse of their intended effects. The person who desperately wants to be liked becomes less likable. The person who needs approval becomes less worthy of respect. The person who seeks validation becomes less trusted with responsibility. Their very desperation undermines the outcomes they are trying to achieve. Observe this principle in everyday interactions. The job candidate who appears too eager for the position often gets passed over for someone who seems selective about opportunities. The salesperson who appears desperate for the commission repels customers who sense manipulation. The friend who constantly seeks reassurance eventually exhausts others who feel burdened by their emotional needs. The pattern repeats across contexts because it reflects fundamental aspects of human psychology that evolved long before modern social structures. In ancestral environments, desperation signaled vulnerability and potential liability. Groups could not afford to support members who consumed more resources than they contributed. These ancient assessment mechanisms continue to influence contemporary interactions. Modern society pretends that need should generate compassion and support. While this is true in genuine emergency situations, chronic neediness triggers different responses. People unconsciously avoid those who seem likely to drain their energy without providing equivalent value in return. Detachment works because it signals internal security. Someone who can remain calm during conflict appears to have resources that others lack. Someone who can walk away from opportunities suggests they have better alternatives available. Someone who does not seek external validation implies they have developed reliable internal validation systems. These signals register unconsciously in others and affect how they respond. The brain interprets detachment as evidence of strength, competence, and desirability. It assumes that someone who does not need external support must possess internal capabilities worth respecting and potentially emulating. The workplace provides countless examples of this principle in action. The employee who seems indifferent to promotion often gets promoted faster than the one who campaigns aggressively for advancement. The consultant who appears willing to walk away from a project can command higher fees than the one who seems desperate for the work. The negotiator who demonstrates comfort with no agreement often gets better terms than the one who signals they need a deal. This pattern frustrates those who believe merit should be transparent and effort should be rewarded proportionally. They invest enormous energy in demonstrating their value, only to watch others receive opportunities despite appearing to care less. The paradox seems unfair until the underlying psychology is understood. Consider the employee who constantly volunteers for extra assignments, stays late to impress supervisors, and sends frequent updates about their contributions. Their behavior signals desperation for recognition rather than confidence in their value. Managers begin to see them as someone who needs constant validation rather than someone capable of independent judgment. Meanwhile, the employee who completes excellent work without fanfare, takes on challenges when asked, but does not volunteer obsessively, and communicates results efficiently rather than extensively, signals competence and self-assurance. Their detachment from immediate recognition makes their actual contributions more noticeable and valuable. The sales environment illustrates these dynamics particularly clearly. The salesperson who immediately offers discounts, responds to emails within minutes, and agrees to unreasonable terms, signals desperation that undermines their negotiating position. Customers sense this neediness and interpret it as evidence that the product or service may not be worth the asking price. The salesperson who takes time to respond, maintains their pricing structure, and appears willing to lose sales rather than compromise their standards, creates the opposite impression. Their detachment suggests confidence in their offering and abundant alternatives, which makes customers more eager to secure their services. Networking events reveal similar patterns. The person who desperately collects business cards, name-drops connections, and oversells their capabilities repels potential collaborators. Their neediness broadcasts insecurity that makes others uncomfortable and unwilling to make referrals or recommendations. The person who attends networking events with genuine curiosity about others, shares information freely without expecting immediate reciprocation, and appears selective about forming connections attracts more valuable relationships. Their detachment from immediate outcomes allows authentic connections to develop naturally. Human beings are social creatures who evolve to assess status and competence quickly. In ancestral environments, the ability to identify reliable allies and potential threats determined survival. These assessment mechanisms remain active in modern contexts, even when survival is not at stake. Desperation signals vulnerability, which triggers protective instincts rather than respect. Someone who needs help appears to be a liability rather than an asset. Someone who seems emotionally unstable appears risky to associate with or depend upon. The brain automatically categorizes needy people as low status and treats them accordingly. Detachment signals the opposite qualities. It suggests self-sufficiency, emotional regulation, and abundant resources. The detached person appears to be someone who could provide support rather than require it. This positioning naturally elevates them in others' perceptions and treatment. The challenge lies in achieving genuine detachment rather than performed indifference. Fake detachment carries subtle signals that betray the underlying need. The person pretending not to care often tries too hard to demonstrate their indifference, which ironically reveals how much they actually care. Genuine detachment emerges from having legitimate alternatives and developing internal validation systems that do not depend on external approval. This requires building actual capabilities, creating multiple options, and finding satisfaction in the process of work rather than just its outcomes. The difference between authentic and performed detachment appears in numerous subtle ways. Performed detachment often involves dramatic declarations of independence, conspicuous displays of indifference, or strategic use of silence as a weapon. The person is still emotionally invested in others' responses, just seeking different responses than they previously sought. Authentic detachment appears quieter and more consistent. The person simply operates from a different internal foundation that does not require external validation for stability. They do not announce their indifference or use it strategically because they genuinely feel less need for specific outcomes. This distinction becomes apparent under pressure. When someone challenges or criticizes the person with performed detachment, their facade often cracks, revealing anger, hurt, or defensive behavior that contradicts their claimed indifference. The genuinely detached person remains stable because their security does not depend on others' opinions. Social media provides a laboratory for observing these differences. Some individuals post content designed to appear effortlessly successful or mysteriously independent, while actually fishing for specific types of validation. Their posts feel calculated and inauthentic because they are strategic rather than spontaneous. Others post content that reflects genuine indifference to external approval. They share what interests them without optimizing for engagement, respond to comments without seeking particular reactions, and maintain consistent voice regardless of audience response. Their authenticity often attracts more genuine engagement than strategic posting. The development of authentic detachment typically involves several stages. Initially, someone may recognize their neediness and attempt to suppress it through willpower alone. This approach rarely succeeds because the underlying insecurity remains unchanged. Next, they may try strategic detachment, deliberately withholding attention, approval, or availability to create artificial scarcity. This approach may produce short-term results but ultimately fails because it requires constant effort to maintain, and others eventually recognize the manipulation. Finally, they may focus on building genuine alternatives, developing internal validation systems, and creating abundance in their lives. This approach takes longer but produces lasting results because it addresses the root causes of neediness rather than merely suppressing its symptoms. The detached person in a romantic relationship does not stop loving their partner, but they stop needing their partner's constant reassurance to feel secure. This shift often revitalizes the relationship because it removes the emotional burden from the partner and restores the dynamic that originally created attraction. The detached professional does not stop caring about their work quality, but they stop needing their supervisor's approval to feel competent. This shift often accelerates their career advancement because it demonstrates leadership potential and reduces their manager's emotional workload. The detached friend does not stop caring about others, but they stop needing others' problems to define their own worth. This shift often strengthens their relationships because it allows them to provide support from a position of strength rather than codependency. In each case, detachment enhances rather than diminishes the person's effectiveness. They become more valuable to others precisely because they need less from others. This reduced neediness allows their genuine strengths to become visible rather than being obscured by desperate behavior. Romantic relationships demonstrate this principle most clearly because they involve high emotional stakes and frequent interaction. The partner who constantly seeks reassurance about the relationship's future requires regular declarations of love, and becomes anxious when their partner spends time independently creates emotional exhaustion in the other person. This neediness transforms love into obligation. The non-needy partner begins to feel responsible for managing their partner's emotional state rather than enjoying natural intimacy. Expressions of affection become performances required to maintain peace rather than spontaneous demonstrations of genuine feeling. When someone develops healthy detachment in relationships, they maintain their investment in their partner's well-being while becoming less dependent on their partner's mood, attention, and validation. They can enjoy time together without needing to control the timing, frequency, or structure of interactions. This shift often surprises the other partner, who has become accustomed to managing the needy person's emotions. Initially, they may interpret detachment as loss of interest or preparation for abandonment. However, if the detachment is genuine rather than manipulative, they often discover renewed attraction to their partner's independence and confidence. Parent-child relationships also illustrate these dynamics, though the direction varies by age and circumstances. Young children naturally require significant attention and validation from parents. However, as children develop, those who learn healthy detachment from parental approval often receive more respect and autonomy than those who remain emotionally dependent. Adult children who constantly seek parental validation, require financial support, or need emotional rescue from life challenges often receive treatment that reflects their dependent status. Adult children who demonstrate emotional and financial independence while maintaining loving connections often find their opinions valued more highly and their choices respected more completely. The timing of detachment affects its impact significantly. Withdrawing emotional investment after a relationship or situation has become established sends different signals than maintaining detachment from the beginning. Sudden detachment may be interpreted as manipulation or punishment rather than genuine indifference. Authentic detachment develops gradually as someone builds alternative sources of satisfaction and validation. It cannot be switched on instantly without appearing contrived. The process involves reducing dependency on specific outcomes while maintaining commitment to excellent performance and ethical behavior. Professional contexts reward detachment when it signals competence and reliability. The consultant who appears busy and selective about projects can charge premium rates. The employee who seems content with their current role often gets offered better opportunities. The entrepreneur who appears willing to bootstrap rather than desperately seeking investment often attracts investors. However, detachment can backfire when it signals disengagement or lack of commitment. The key distinction involves caring about quality while being detached from specific outcomes. High standards with low attachment tends to be respected. Low standards with high attachment tends to be dismissed. The development of healthy detachment requires building genuine alternatives rather than pretending they exist. Someone with multiple job offers can authentically care less about any single opportunity. Someone with diverse income streams can authentically care less about any single client. Someone with strong friendships can authentically care less about any single social interaction. This preparation makes detachment feel natural rather than forced. The person genuinely has less at stake in any particular outcome, which allows them to participate more freely without the constraint of desperation. Their reduced neediness often makes them more enjoyable to interact with and work alongside. Detachment also protects against emotional manipulation by those who exploit others' needs and insecurities. Someone who desperately needs approval becomes vulnerable to anyone willing to provide or withhold it. Someone who desperately needs financial security becomes vulnerable to anyone who controls their income. Someone who desperately needs social connection becomes vulnerable to anyone who threatens isolation. Reducing these dependencies through detachment creates freedom from manipulation while simultaneously making the person less attractive as a target. Manipulators prefer victims who need what they can provide or threaten to take away. Self-sufficient individuals offer fewer leverage points for control. The paradox of detachment is that it often produces the very outcomes that attachment seeks to achieve. The person who stops needing approval often starts receiving it spontaneously. The person who stops desperately seeking opportunities often finds them appearing naturally. The person who stops chasing relationships often attracts them effortlessly. This occurs because detachment removes the desperate energy that repels others while revealing the authentic qualities that attract them. When someone stops performing for external validation, their genuine personality becomes visible. When someone stops needing specific outcomes, they can focus on excellent process, which typically produces better results. Understanding this principle provides strategic advantages for those who can implement it authentically. Rather than trying to convince others of their value through persuasion or demonstration, they can create value internally and allow others to discover it naturally. Rather than pursuing specific outcomes directly, they can build capabilities that make positive outcomes more likely. The most sophisticated practitioners of detachment maintain high standards for their own performance while remaining genuinely indifferent to others' recognition or appreciation of that performance. They work for internal satisfaction and long-term positioning rather than immediate external rewards. This approach requires patience and confidence in the delayed gratification principle. The benefits of detachment often appear over time rather than immediately. Building genuine alternatives takes effort before it creates freedom. Developing internal validation systems requires practice before they become reliable. Most importantly, detachment must serve ethical purposes rather than manipulative ones. Using indifference as a weapon to control others violates the principle of authentic detachment and ultimately undermines its effectiveness. Others eventually recognize strategic manipulation and respond negatively to it. Genuine detachment emerges from abundance, security, and options. It creates respect because it signals internal strength and reduces emotional burdens on others. It attracts opportunities because it suggests someone who could handle them effectively. It builds influence because it demonstrates the kind of psychological independence that others admire and want to emulate.